All right, we're going to start. I just wanted to show you this. This nothing big. I created this last semester for the 119 class. All right? So why am I showing you that? You know, who cares? Well, I've gone back and kind of redone it for this class. It's not quite finished yet, but when it is, I'll put it out there. So what I have out there is some, this is the old one. Sorry about that. That isn't it. I guess that is it. I don't know. But I've got stuff in here on HTML5. Got stuff in here on CSS3. I've got stuff in here on JavaScript. This website's down. That's why that's not there. And I'm getting stuff in there right now. I just got the jQuery stuff to go. All right? And I'll put that out there, so if that can help you in any way, fine. Today we're going to go over chapters 4, 5, and 6, and we'll do as much of that before the break as we can. All right, probably won't finish it, but if we do, great. And then after the break, sometime, I'm going to give you your first assignment. All right, and you will have lab all next week. I also, as I told you, and I'm not trying to be funny when I say this, I'll try to finish by no later than 11:40 today. There's free lunch. All right, and Roger, who's on the SNAP committee, told me it's going to be wraps. And there's the guy who's the mentalist. He used to be called the hypnotist, but he's the mentalist now. All right, and he will be performing from 12 to 1. I've seen him before. He's pretty good. So, all right, chapter 4, lesson 4, which starts in our book on page 105. It looks like I'm getting there. All right, page 105. Again, this is all review. You should know how to add CSS to documents, how to use CSS selectors, how to apply color, images, etc., how to create borders, how to define the look and feel of web pages. The only one that really is new in here is the designing CSS to be used by your Angular, jQuery, and JavaScript code. All right, so like I said, the stuff that's in here is not new. And as the author mentions in here someplace, this lesson focuses on adding CSS styles to your HTML documents. I'm taking for granted that by now everybody in here knows how to create CSS, knows what CSS is, and knows how to create external CSS, because you will be expected, starting with this first assignment, you will be expected to be writing unobtrusive code. In other words, you will have your JavaScript in one file, your HTML in one file, your CSS in one file, etc. All right? So as mentioned, the following sections cover the syntax, etc. All right. By now, again, my hope is everyone understands there's basically three different ways that you can add CSS. You can add it externally using a .css file. All right, you can add it on a web page by web page basis using the style tag. And you can add it on an element basis using a span tag. All right, again, there should be nothing new in there. If you put absolutely nothing on your site, it'll still have CSS because browsers actually have CSS that they put on your site. And I don't know if I've ever shown this to you, if you've ever used it, but Eric Myers, who's one of the kind of CSS gurus, there's other reset files, but he's got a really good reset file. It's right here. And notice what he starts with. He basically takes every friggin' tag there is in the language and removes margin, removes padding, removes border. So the idea is if you've got a web page that has been set up with CSS and you run that on it, everything's just going to be pushed over to the left and it'll look really generic. All right? But a lot of times what you'll see in a site is people will run that first, then they will add their own stuff. Then they don't have to worry about, well, is there going to be any problem with me overwriting anything from the browser or whatever, because you're turning it off here. All right. You know you use the link tag and how you do it. I think everybody knows this. This attribute that's right here, the type equals, is no longer required. Most people still put it in. You don't need the type equals text / CSS for a CSS document. You don't need the type equals text / JavaScript for a JS file. All right, that's basically setting up the MIME type. All right, and no, I'm not going to do this, but all right, it'll do that stuff for you. Okay, basically today that's it already is I don't know if it's inherently added or what. You can put it in; it doesn't hurt anything, but you don't have to. All right. So again, there's going in and adding the stuff inside of a file itself with the style tag. If you do that, again, you have to put it within your head tags. All right. Here's an example of putting it in with a span tag. So in other words, right there, if you wanted to, that little bit of text that says style text would have a background color of blue. It would be bolded, and it would be a white font. Hopefully you know this. That is totally, it's not that it's disallowed, but you are highly discouraged from ever using span tags. That said, I can see where there comes an occasion you just want to change a word or whatever, and you can use them. All right. The CSS syntax, again, am I right in assuming that everybody knows exactly what that means? That there's no one in here that doesn't understand what that means? So what are we working with? We're setting up a rule. A rule for what? Our selector is the P, the paragraph. And our selectors are within curly braces. So we're saying that unless told otherwise, every paragraph on this page should be italic, that should be its color, and that should be its width. All right? You can put it in multiple lines. As long as I can read your stuff, I don't really care that much. I write mine like this. In fact, I put the curly on its own line. But everybody's different as far as their coding style. There are several different things that you can use when you work, several different properties where you can go and add everything like this, as opposed to having to say font style, : background color, : width, : where you can do things like this. All right. All right, the key to using CSS, though, are the selectors. And the reason that that's such a key is because you're going to be using selectors not only with CSS, but you're going to use them almost exclusively with jQuery. All right. Now, one of the things that I put out there, and I'm not trying to plug my own stuff. I don't feel the need to do that, but just so you know it. Oops. Give me a break. But I think I've mentioned this to you before, just in case I haven't. What I have done for this class is I have already gone through and maybe taken a little more time than I'm taking here. I've gone through the first 11 chapters. So that's out there already. All right. In addition, there's a bunch of jQuery examples. Most of these I did last fall, but there's a couple HTML intro things, and one of the things that's in here also has got a big thing on the CSS selectors. All right? So if you're interested in that, fine. If you're not, also fine. All right. It doesn't really pay to go over something like this table that you see that's on pages 111 and 112, and there are a lot of tables in this chapter. And I would be an idiot to say something to you like, okay, for your first assignment, you've got to create web pages and you've got to use every one of these. I mean, come on. But the idea is, especially the ones that you don't use often, people know how to use classes, people know how to use IDs, etc. All right? But when you talk about parents and precedents and stuff, this is a good table to look through. All right? The stuff with regular expressions, begins with, ends with, contained anywhere in there, etc. All right? And again, my guess is you all have gotten experience using link, visited, active, hover, etc. You've all got experience using those. All right. Colors, I don't care how you set your colors up. I think what does it say in here? There's 147 predefined color names. And if you want to know what they are, you can go and click that link right there. I'm not going to. All right. But you can also use the hex values, and then you get like 16.7 million colors. You can use RGB, which is similar to hex, but rather than A through F. Every value, red, green, and blue, has a 0 through 255 value. You can use RGBA, all right? And the A stands for alpha, both here, and here. But RGBA, you put an extra number in that's between 0 and 1. All right? 0 is fully transparent, 1 is totally opaque. Yes?
What page was that CSS chart on?
Right here?
The table, the one on.
Oh, the one that's in the book?
Yeah.
It's on 111 and 112. And so another way that you can do it is you can base your colors on hue, saturation, and lightness. All right? Most people don't like that just because they've been using RGB for years and they find it easier to do that, or they just use the standard color. I don't know if you've ever done this or if you know what I'm talking about, but for instance, with these 147 predefined colors, the green, for example, that's really an ugly green. Typically, it's probably not going to be the one that you want to use. All right? Okay, so they've got a thing in here that goes through all sorts of style examples. I kind of like this because they put some stuff in here and then they show you the output. Put some more stuff in here and show you the output, etc. They show you how you can put stuff together, underline, strike through, but this is all stuff, again, that you should have had back in the day of 152, 157. All right? So if you put all that in, this is what it ends up looking like. It's pretty ugly, but again, it's functional and it shows you a lot of the stuff that's in here that you would probably, at least some of it, would be the stuff you'd be most apt to use. All right. Remember when you work with backgrounds? Okay. Tell me this, that a lot of developers, even if they set up a background and they have some kind of an attachment for their background, they still set up a background color. Why do they do that?
The monitor is bigger than the background?
Yeah. Well, or you could say unless I'd turn it around and I'd say unless the background was smaller than what you're trying to show it on. All right? And typically you do that. I will tell you right now, you're getting an assignment that's virtually the same as the one in the 167 class, except I added stuff on it. But one of the things I'm going to be doing in here, all right, because I'm looking at this is your last semester. You are hopefully now totally getting prepared to go out in the workforce. So I'm going to, a part of your grade is going to be based on the quality of what you do. So if it looks like, well, it was Sunday night, I forgot we had an assignment, so I did it, and it's there, and it's really ugly, and the colors don't go together, and I've got this really ugly red background and black text you can barely read, that'll be reflected in your grade. All right? But you will have all next week to work on it, and it won't be due for at least, until at least 2 weeks from Sunday. All right? You can work with gradients if you want to, color gradients, and a lot of people like to do that. In some ways, working with gradients is kind of like morphing. All right, when you morph from one image into another image. Still, and I'm sure it's still out there, my favorite morph of all time was Barney. Remember Barney the dinosaur? It was Barney into Hitler. That's still, of all times, that's my favorite morph. Yeah, there probably is a Trump one now. Trump into something. All right. They have a thing in here on borders. That's table 4-2. And that's all the way up to page 126. Okay. Again, don't overdo this stuff. I'm not going to, for example, on your assignment, I'm not going to say you have to put a table in there. But if a table makes sense for you to put in there, you should put it in. If you use a table, what kind of data should you put into a table? Tabular data. Data that belongs in a table. All right? What they talked about back in Chapter 3 was they showed you, if you remember that, they showed you a table and it had hyperlinks in it and it had images in it. And back in the olden days, that's how people usually set up their websites. They had one huge table. Their whole site was a table. And then for each page, they put tables in there. Not anymore. And there's a good example here. If you run that, and again, you have the code, all the different ways that you can set up borders. All right. Then they get into talking about the cursor here on the bottom of page 130. And again, hopefully at least, that stuff all makes sense. Okay? Should you ever change your cursor? A lot of times that's an individual type of decision. All right? If you need more on opacity, what we talked about, all right, 0 is transparent, 1 is opaque. All right, you can take a look here. There's a little bit more on it right here. One thing I've never liked, and I may have mentioned this to you, I may not have, I don't like, I guess you could probably come up with a really good argument against what I'm saying right now. But when people always do display nones on a page, when stuff is disappearing and then it's reappearing, all right, as an end user, I just don't like the way that looks. If you're going to use that, I would strongly recommend, especially when we get into the jQuery stuff, you start using fade in and fade out. And you look at it and you come up or slide in and or slide up and slide down, etc. You'll see those when we get into that part of the course. But the point is, when you do that, you set up the number of milliseconds over which that's supposed to happen. All right? And again, always gauge that by your audience. Young kids aren't freaked out when stuff appears, disappears, moves around on screen. Old people, like me, all right, a lot of them just get really, weirded out when that happens. So know your audience. All right. I believe I've talked about this before, and that is what's called the CSS Box Model that's right here. So if this is your content, surrounding your content is your padding, surrounding your padding is your border, surrounding your border is your margin. And I may have shown you this already, and if I have, sorry about that. They keep moving this around. I like this because it really shows exactly what's happening in here. It's got the little 3D effect. All right, and I always just type in Red Melon CSS Box Model Demo, and it brings it up. Now, I will tell you something that's not in your book. And I'm asking you this. And if you haven't, just be honest. How many of you have ever heard of Flexbox? Okay. What it is in some ways, all right, is in some ways at least, it's designed to replace where you're doing a lot of float left, float right, where you've got to be clearing your floats, etc. It allows you to set up a thing. They say it's a layout mode for providing for the arrangement of elements on a page. All right? And it's the, quote, new thing, unquote. All right? Why am I telling you this? Well, again, at the end of this semester in this class, you are going to be, whenever that date is, it'll probably be Thursday, the 19th of May. There'll be somewhere upwards of 25 people in here, and you will be presenting for a minimum of 10 minutes each student, all right? And you're going to be going over your project, what you did for your project, and if you want to use this assignment, you can show as much stuff in that time as you can or want to. But the idea is, so let's say that Ben does this and he uses Flexbox. All right. Well, hopefully at least two of the people who are going to be there are from what's the place? Where is it that Micah works? Foremost. Thank you. Are going to be from Foremost. And if you can show them you know and understand the latest and the greatest, all right, you're auditioning. And if you say, well, hell, I don't want a job around here, it doesn't matter. You're going to audition anyway. All right? Okay. Positioning is also important in CSS. Do you want something that has a fixed position, an absolute position, or a relative position? Notice fixed positions it relative to the browser window. Absolute basically means it's not going to move. All right. Sometimes you want to use positioning like that because it's amazing. I printed at our in-service, they gave us copies of all these different reports. We've got a system here that's called Cognos, and it'll print out reports. So it tells me a grade dispersion that I've had, I can say in this class in the last 10 years. And it'll show me all the grades, etc. Well, the point is, on one of them, it was more or less a summary report, and it was like 6 pages long. All right, and what it did was on each page, on the top of it, you had titles. But as it went over each page, you didn't have the titles. So we had to either manually put them in or whatever. Well, that doesn't look good. So sometimes if you're going to be showing something on a site and somebody is going to have to scroll, you might want to set it up so that it's basically in an absolute type of position. So as they scroll, those titles don't move. All right. Z-index, again, I'm taking for granted that you've at least heard of the term. The idea is when you start positioning stuff all over the place and you use a bunch of non-static type of positioning, all right, you might have something that literally overwrites something else. So in other words, I might have something here that's a circle, and then I might have put a square there, and I may or may not want that kind of effect to take place. So on each of these things, I can give them a z-index. The element with the higher z-index, the higher, and it's based on numbers, goes to the foreground, with the lower z-index goes to the background by default. When you've got stuff that overflows, as they show right here, all right, you can make it visible, which is the default behavior. You can hide it. You can scroll, so add scroll bars. And which one should you use? It depends on what it is you're trying to do and what it is you're trying to show. So again, there's another example here where they're building this thing kind of from scratch, for lack of better words. All right, so they're showing it to you, and they're showing you they use the z-index in here also. All right, and then finally, as we reach the end of this chapter, this is on page 140, preparing CSS styles for dynamic design. The big thing is any element that's on a web page that you may conceivably want to be reacting with or have it react to jQuery or JavaScript, it's pretty important that you give those things IDs and or classes. And it's totally possible for any HTML element to have both a class and an ID. All right, it can have only one ID, but it can have multiple classes associated with it if you want to or need to do that. All right, and they're trying to sell you as to why you should do this. All right, because it allows that dynamicity. As it says, it's much simpler because it's very easy to add and remove classes. The second is you can make adjustments, for lack of better words, on the fly. All right, that's pretty much it for this chapter. Okay, and I'm going to take for granted that since it was reviewed, there probably aren't a whole heck of a lot of questions on it. So let me do this. I'm going to stop this, and I'm going to start up right away.